everyone, I'm Sloan from SloanBella.com, and I am back with another channeled missing child video. Now this particular young boy was named Stephen Stayner. He was born on April 18th of 1965. He would be 57 years old right now in this day and age. Now Stephen lived in Merced, California, and he was on his way home when he was approached by two men in a car. These two men talked about church and pamphlets and information and what his parents wanted, and Stephen was reluctant at first to go with these two men who tried to convince him that his family wanted him to get a ride home by these two men. The only thing I can think about this is, at this point in this day and age, all of us should be telling our kids, grandkids, any kids, that we will never send other people to pick them up, because this was an easy way in to trick a kid. You're dealing with adult intellect, even though they may not have been that bright, and child intellect. It's completely abusive in its approach. So we need to tell and warn our children firstly. Now what comes to mind when I see a vehicle pulling up in 1972, okay, December 4th of 72, what comes to mind is a station wagon. Always hated those cars. They were sold or advertised as a family vehicle that was a car and a vehicle, and you could pack everybody in it and the family dog and go camping. I always saw station wagons as pervert vehicles. Dads who would leave, drink, get home from work, get in the station wagon and try to pick up young girls. That's how I saw station wagons growing up. However, these two men actually pulled up in a white Buick, and Stephen was, as I said, reluctant at first, but he got in the vehicle, and that is when his nightmare started. I know the end of the story. It was a very public story. So what I wanted to channel was the energy around why this happened to this particular boy, and because I'm beginning to see energetic patterns between certain situations, and I wanted to know why. Why this kid and not that kid? So Stephen Stayner, as I said, was born on April 18th of 1965. And he had Moon conjunct Neptune in Scorpio, okay, was in Aquarius rising, which was very good considering, because you don't want to actually feel what you would have to feel. The Aquarius rising would have given him a distance by putting all of his emotions up into his head. But in the first house, because of the middle degree to late degree Aquarius rising, we have Saturn in Pisces in the first house. We have a bunch of people from 65, 66, and 67 who are either perfectionists at what they do, very skilled, very focused in one area of their life, or they're very unfocused, drugs, homelessness, and addiction, or they are the pioneers on an energetic level, changing the perceptions of society. This is what I think Stephen was. I think he was a game changer. I think he was a trauma changer. I think he came to this world to do that. When I looked at his chart, picked up on his energy, this young boy literally came into this world to do that. Now, what I find so interesting, Pisces, Saturn in the first house, okay? So his energy from his ascendant was a mixture of Aquarius with Pisces, which is a good mixture. It's not too off the wall, and it's not too, unrelatable to the heart chakra. But Saturn in the first house, as I've told you guys, is an indicator of leaving the most recent past life very quickly, very rapidly, and usually through one's own actions, okay? So depending on the aspects to Saturn, depending on what happened, depending on the sign that it's in, other planets in opposition, etc. Now this is fascinating, because that Saturn in his second house, Stephen's second house, directly is in opposition to retrograde Pluto, retrograde Uranus, and retrograde Mars. This is in his natal chart. So everything about this child from first to seventh house was about these do-overs in relationships. He literally was born into an energetic cult family. This sounds really weird because his family was not in a cult. But he energetically was born with soul ties to a group of people who basically removed him from his first life, last life, and then took him out again in this life. But he had to experience this with clear eyes in this time. He was also held up as a mirror for the rest of society with which to bounce their fears about their own children back and forth. So after Stephen Stayner went missing, and after he came back, which I will get into that in a second, after that experience with Stephen, people began to see, it could happen to me. It might happen to me. It could happen to any one of our children. It wasn't so much so now that it was just that kid down there, that street. Now, Stephen also had another very spiritual quality. Besides being a birth path 7 in this life, which is a spiritual connotation, I tie it together with him being born natally with Mercury retrograde. So he had Mercury in Aries, Venus in Aries, and the Sun in Aries, okay? All in the second house, bordering on the third house, but all in the second house. The Mercury retrograde allowed Stephen, okay, psychic insight, perceptive, intuitive, connected, centered insight into his circumstances. So they were not able to break him. He was able to see clearly who his captors were intuitively. So when you have the presence of foresight from the other side, they can't break you. This is why he came back out of being captured in a way that would teach people. But in Aries fashion, other things happened to this young man. Now, I wanted to know why this kid, why this family. I had to know why this kid, why this family. So Stephen was kidnapped at the age of 7. He was taken approximately 30 miles from his home, only 30 miles. I must drive 100 miles a day. Your kid is kidnapped and 30 miles away from where you live. I wanted to know why this kid. Why? And I'll explain that a little bit more as we can keep saying that as we get to the end. So Stephen went missing and he became the child of this Kenneth Parnell. This Kenneth Parnell and this Irvin Murphy person, his right-hand man, who was described as not too bright, but he was bright enough to kidnap a child and go out and try to kidnap others. So he knew what he was doing. Anyway, these two clowns worked as groundskeepers at Yosemite, at the Yosemite Lodge, or around the Yosemite Lodge in California. So these two clowns had access to all kinds of people, all kinds of circumstances, all kinds of situations. And they used the church. Now here's when I was channeling the information, and this just basically creeped me out. We now have a different opinion of people who say they're from the church, thanks to the Catholics and thanks to every other preacher and thanks to the Mormons and every other group of people who's basically solidified the fact that we can't trust these church people. You have to know your relationship to God. However, this Kenneth Parnell, his energy was incredibly interesting. The damage that happened to him as a child, and I don't care if you're going to continue damaging other people because if you're damaged, there's something wrong with you. But this particular man had a lot of ideation about saving young boys. I've not read this anywhere. This is what I picked up from him. About saving young boys from the same background that he came from. But he was so overzealous in his saving of the young boys that he literally took the young boys and perpetrated the same abuse that he experienced. I find it so interesting because the kind of sexual experience that he had goes right back to the sodomy ritual. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So he was using these young boys to gain spiritual insight, spiritual power, absorption of bodily energy and auric field energy from his victims through the act of sodomy. So we're talking about Kenneth Parnell. I think he died recently, sometime in the 2000s, late 2000s, maybe 2016 or 14 or something. Anyway, not the point. We don't care when he died. Hopefully he's burning. Anyhow, that guy, that man, had opened himself up through his own childhood sexual abuse to welcome in other entities that were encouraging the behavior that he was doing. So I said to myself still, why Stephen? Because I look at his chart and I can see this incredibly complicated chart. Now, the moon in Scorpio, with it conjuncting Neptune, represents his mother. And it's in opposition to Jupiter. So we're going from the 9th, 10th house to the 3rd, 4th house in the chart. The mother Neptune on the moon in Scorpio was so afraid to touch on an emotional level the reality of what was around her that she chose to remain naive, okay? So this woman chose to see things with naivete, can't say that right, but that. So she chose that. In choosing that, she could not see who she was married to, because Stephen's chart speaks directly of the sins of the father handed on down through karmic ties from lifetime to lifetime. So I still couldn't figure it out. So I straight up asked, what the hell? And I was sent on this chase on the internet to find out what Stephen's father did. Of course, he worked for the army. At the time that this happened, he worked for the army. Okay, you know what I'm saying if you listen to me with that. But Stephen himself was born into a family where they were mind controlled, and the energy that I got is very early on in Stephen's life. So we're talking, geez, he would have been like 4. His brother would have been like 7. These 2 boys were being physically and sexually abused within the context of their home by an uncle. This is what I picked up on. And I picked up on that the father was partaking in similar aspects of this behavior. Now, what I got from both of these men, this is just me allegedly in my head with what I pick up, but what I got from both men is that they were overstimulating these boys. Stephen had a brother named Carrie. Not clear on the other siblings. I believe there was a daughter too. There could have been more than one daughter, but I'm just talking about these 2 brothers and Stephen. So Stephen was kidnapped at age 7. Stephen lived 1 Saturn cycle to clear the karma of his first house Saturn. Seriously. He lived 1 Saturn cycle till the age of 14. When in February, Stephen found out that Kenneth and Irvin, the dumbass sidekick, kidnapped a little boy named Timothy White. And this little boy was 4 or 5, very tiny. And Stephen, at the end of that Saturn cycle, karma completed, literally got some big ass strength, took that little Timothy White with him, hitchhiked and went to the police and said, "Hi, my name is Stephen." And you remember the movie. He took that little boy because he could not bear that that little boy was going to go through the same fate. But here's what I picked up. Here's something even weirder. There's a connection between Stephen and the man he thought was his father, because Kenneth Parnell told the kid after he kidnapped him, raped him, sodomized him, that his parents didn't want him anymore. So Stephen had to build what? A trauma bond with this man, because this was the man that was feeding him. And he had to believe he was his father. His name was changed. His hair color was changed. In actuality, the energy that I found through asking why you actually went to the police was that Stephen had a deep sense of loss in the parental relationship that he had had from 7 to 14 with this man that was abusing him, which just showed me the capacity of both a trauma bond and unconditional love between Stephen and this man. Even though he probably would never admit it, he was deeply tied to this man because he thought this man was his father, even though he remembered having a father and a mother and siblings. So Stephen actually, as a point of being emotionally rejected and abandoned attachment-wise, because suddenly Stephen is 14, he's a man, and Kenneth don't like to fuck men, okay? So he likes boys. So Stephen is no longer a suitable partner for the love that Stephen was used to in that 7 years, and also is basically not paying attention to him because he's 14 and he's like, shoo. This also shows insight into Kenneth's childhood abuse. When Kenneth was left and thrown to the curb by the man that did this to him. Both of these people, Stephen and Kenneth, are going through the same Saturn cycle at the same time for different reasons, which I found so fascinating. So Stephen hitchhikes with this little boy, and they turn him into the police. And obviously that's in in March of 1980. So this goes worldwide. They found Stephen Stayner, and the mother is so interesting. She's like, I always knew he was alive. A mother would know, but she never gave up hope. I wonder if she ever recognized what her husband was, because I directly connect the abuse of both of her sons to the mindset of her husband. Look, is this blurry? We have him stepping in again. Blurry? Okay, mine blurry. It's so blurry. I have to stop it and start it when it blurs, but I like to leave it in because you guys see it. So the mother, she had no idea in her own head, Neptune conjunct the moon, in her own delusional world, like a Scorpio. Don't break that delusion. Do not break the illusion and delusion I'm living in, because I got a Scorpio moon and I will attack the shit out of you if this is brought to my attention. I do not want to see the reality. I do not want to see it. So that woman stayed in and it's so interesting, in a cult-like mindset in order to avoid understanding who she was married to. And I'm being serious when I say that. Understand, the dad, and I think his name is like Delbert. So we've got Kenneth, we've got Delbert, the father, and we've got Irvin, the weirdo sidekick. So we have all these names like right out of Deliverance, right? I'm sorry. Anyhow, Delbert, the dad, if that is actually the name, I might have said it wrong. I honestly believe that when you go into the army and you want to have a nice life back then, consider this back then. Stephen's born in 1965. Which means his brother was born in August 13th of 1961. Carrie Stayner, going to get into that. So both of these kids are born then, right? So the dad is in the army prior to that in the 50s, during the heightened time frame of when all of the doctors came over from, World War II under the guise of not being doctors and not being terrorists who just did that in World War II, came into this country. And we have Project Paperclip, and we have Monarch Mind Control. We have all of these things coming into association. And then we have California, which is cuckoo. And we have Stephen Stayner's father working as an army sergeant in the army, okay? So targeted right there. We'll give you a home, we'll give you money, we'll build you up if you let us do this. Let's do this experiment. Let's do this. And by the time you agree, everything that you've agreed to, you've been tricked into, okay? It's basically trickery. It's never truthful. So I actually believe the Stayner family was an experiment, an experimental energetic situation. I believe that Kenneth Parnell and Irvin Murphy were also involved, triggered and involved. And I believe it started with Kenneth in his childhood due to the sodomy, and I'm being dead ass serious, harnessing of the energy through the back system of chakras, all the way up through the spine, all the way up through the crown, and now we harness your energy. So now we manipulate the strands of your brain, the way that you speak, the way that you think. We program you, and I really believe that. I'm not going to stop. Stephen came out of his ordeal the same way, programmed due to his experience, regardless. So when Stephen was found, he was 14. He went on the press circuit. His brother was 4 years older, whatever it is. 4 years older. And so he came back to the family. So suddenly these parents, his siblings, the neighbors, the kids at school, have this boy. And I forgot to mention, there was a woman named Barbara Mathis. And I'd like to mention the woman's name because you are a disgusting disgrace of a woman. You are hideous. She allegedly was Kenneth Parnell's girlfriend. Okay, Mr. Parnell, who's now dead. Why the hell do you need a girlfriend to hide behind? Because we know what you like, and it's not women. So this Barbara Mathis, who dated Kenneth Parnell for, 18 months, they say, did not know that Stephen, who had his name changed, was actually taken from his family. That she specified, but she didn't actually explain why she was okay with partaking in the sex acts with her boyfriend and who she thought was his biological child. Barbara, we need some therapy, okay? So the energy of that means energetically, when you find like-minded and you get them connected through trauma, they will do almost anything to keep your attention. Stephen did almost anything to keep Kenneth's attention by taking Timothy out of the eye line of Kenneth energetically, and then saved himself reluctantly. He didn't know anyone else. Then he went back into a home. I'm assuming, from what I heard, read, people said that it was probably very difficult for him, and I believe his father ended up kicking him out. Okay, Daddy, so you started the process of your son's removal from his family life with your energetic preoccupation with sexual whatever you did, proclivities towards children. Okay, that's the beginning. Overstimulation through porn, through whatever. Both your sons had this happen. Both sons did, and there was an uncle and there was the dad. This is what I pick up. I've not read that anywhere, but this is what I pick up. Now, the uncle could have been somebody they called an uncle. You know, we all let all kinds of people in our home, and it's very strange. Anyhow, Stephen came back into the home. I guess Kenneth Parnell was sent to jail for what, you ask? 7 years. Another Saturn cycle. So it's all running off. You reap as you shall sow, and the Saturnian cycles. So Kenneth Parnell went to jail for 7 years, and so did Irvin Murphy, but he was a little bit slow, so they gave him a little bit of latitude. It might have been 5 years for him. And Barbara Mathis, I guess she skates free because she was just the girlfriend, and she, you know, she didn't know he was kidnapped, but she did sleep with the kid, with the father of the kid, and thought that this was all normal. I think she should be locked up too as a female. Speaking for females, you should not be around the child, okay? You should not be around the child. Anyhow, Kenneth goes to jail. Stephen, he goes to school. He leaves school, rightly so. When you are a light worker, Stephen is a light worker. He came back into the planet. I want to stress this. He came back into this planet, into this lifetime, this dimension, to illuminate and transmute that which was hidden behind churches, hidden behind authority, hidden behind your grandparents, the cycle of childhood sexual abuse. He agreed to go public with it with the same people that took him out and himself out through his own actions in the most recent past life. Like, he literally came back and said, now I'm going to allow myself to be a teaching tool energetically. He did not see that when he was alive, but picking up on his energy, he definitely understands that that's what he was doing, and he was okay with doing that. This was a completely programmed birth. That sounds very strange. I'm not sure the family would know this, but he came in with this entire group, including where the dad worked, who the dad worked for. So this led me down another energetic channel, which didn't come from Stephen, but came from another man that I picked up the energy around, that basically said when Stephen left his most recent past life, before this life, before he was who we know, he was basically recycled, circulated energetically, tied, hidden, bound, and then pushed through at the particular time that they wanted to reenact this circumstance energetically. But his guides twisted it. This is what they were showing me on the other side. His guides twisted it by allowing Stephen to be a mirror for those actions. It's very, very interesting. He's the beginning of this. He is a mirror for those actions. Family tied to the army, child molested within the home prior to being kidnapped. Remember that energy speaks loud. When you are a child of childhood sexual abuse, violence, any kind of abuse, a predator, a predatory person can read that energy. This is what happened to Stephen. Why that little boy? This is what I had to do. So energetically, Stephen's guides, because they couldn't remove him for some reason, I don't know why we're not removed, but Stephen was hidden, recycled back in, reincarnated, recycled, reincarnated. Just like your water bottle is reincarnated into something else. Sounds weird, but that's exactly the analogy I want to use. Stephen is then born, but his soul, his spirit that is always connected to God, that's one thing I got with him, connected to God, is here as a teaching tool to transmute the negative energy. Now, here's the caveat that comes in. So Kenneth Parnell goes to jail, rightly so, but only 7 years, really, Kenneth? I mean, you just got 7 years, like you took 7 years of a child's life, did heinous, perverted, sick things to him. God knows who else you kidnapped a second boy, and you, what, thought you're just going to be free after 7 years? Apparently so. So these two weirdos leave the jail system, and where do they end up, you ask? Right back at Yosemite. Right back there. Especially Irvin Murphy. He goes back and he works at Yosemite. Now, here is the energetic thread I was looking for. It is not a coincidence. To quote a character on Seinfeld, I do not believe in coincidences. It is not a coincidence that this guy went back there, because Stephen Stayner's older brother, Kerry, was caught in I don't think convicted, but he's on death row now. Caught in 1999 for murdering 4 people. Where? Yosemite. So all of these men were energetically in cahoots. Now, what does that mean? Because I don't know that Kerry Stayner knew who Irvin was, right? Who Irvin Murphy was. I don't know that. I don't know if Delbert Stayner knew who Kenneth Parnell was up front, directly interacting. I don't know that. But what I do know is on the astral level and energetically, they were all tied together. That's what Steven showed me. He showed me this game that the kids play, like Ring Around the Rosie, where they're all attached and they're going around, and then one of them falls and it takes a whole group of them down. That's how he showed me. He showed me that energetically. So he was tied to them. They were tied to him. The parents were tied to each other. Everybody was tied in this cycle. Now, Steven at age 20, he got married. And he had 2 kids. He may have had more, but I think it was 2 kids. And on September 16th of 1989, and this I even find interesting. I feel very bad for him, but I feel like it was his exit point. I feel like he accomplished in his life by enlightening everybody to the experience. And he was the first person to go through publicly, really, a trendsetter, an Aries sun, in April 1865. He was one of the first kids that we saw everything about them publicly. Very much like J.C. Dugard is right now. Stephen Stayner was back then. His public struggles, what he felt like, his parents up there, the spotlight in his face, his story, people knowing about what went on. Horrific. But he shined a light. He stood bravely and shined a light. Now, he got married, had 2 kids. He married a girl from high school. I'm not going to mention her name or his kids' names, but he at least had children and got to know that joy. He was riding home, and I'm going to say something really crazy here. He was riding home on his motorcycle, September 16th of 1989, and he was run off the road. Sound familiar? They kind of run people off the road when they've served their purpose in life. And I really feel that Stephen was getting ready to speak about something further on the topic of his being removed from his family early on and what he experienced and what he found out, and they couldn't have it. So energetically, he was removed from his life. Now, his brother went on to kill 4 women in Yosemite, be charged with it, and completely be obsessed with kitty, pictures. This is what he wanted. But he said he had these dark thoughts prior to Stephen being kidnapped. Now let's go back to the family of origin. And the mother who shows up in Stephen's chart, Moon conjunct Neptune, delusional, in the 9th house, not paying attention, Sagittarius, water, and illusion. So a higher-minded thinking, not grounded in practicality, psychic insight, Neptune, ignore it. Okay, so that's where she was. Whoever was molesting those boys, I get uncle and I get father, and I said overstimulation of porn. These 2 kids ended up on each side of the reaction to being vilely assaulted as children, because no child wants to see that kind of material. I don't care what you adults think. It's completely perverse. It messes with your neurons. The pictures of the children that people use for their own gratification actually mess with the neurons in your brain, okay? Much like video games, which are created on the astral level. The way the kids can tune on the computer and see any kind of weirdo activity that anybody comes up with actually rewires your brain, which then in turn rewires your energy. So Stephen Stayner was killed, as I said, September 16th, 1989 on his motorbike. He had no helmet on, so he died within 30 minutes from his head injury. He's in Aries. What part of the body does Aries rule? It rules the head. Saturn in the first house. He did not make it to 42. He made it to 24, not 42. Had he made it to 42, he would have completely cleared out that cycle. But for some reason, they took him out. Now, I would like to see the rest of the family be accountable for what they did prior to these two boys ending up in jail and one being kidnapped. I would like to see that happen. I doubt that will ever happen. But I can tell you, Stephen he has this really interesting personality. He was very philosophical. He was very spiritual, and he had this guidance of psychic insight. He also recognized at a certain point in time that he would be free, so he very clearly and energetically bided his time till then. He was learning how to let go at the same time of holding on. It's very interesting. His life is so parallel, energetically different. It's very, very interesting. The young boy that he saved, Timothy White, I think that's his name, Timothy White. Anyway, the young boy that he saved, I looked him up. I seem to have read that he he was a policeman, but it said in Newhall, so like up the street, up the freeway in Newhall. But unfortunately, and here's another thing that makes no sense, he died of an aneurysm at the age of 35, 6 or 7, whatever, very, very young. And he died. Now, I don't know if that Newhall is a different Newhall in California or if it's actually the Newhall by Santa Clarita. Either way, he was a police officer and he died. So Stephen saved him. He was able to do his work and then pass when the karma was completed. Because I got that with Timothy White. Like, this was just a completion of a lifetime. So it's very, very interesting how some people skirt the issue and other people are driven right into the issue and have no way to escape. But Stephen Stayner, the way that I look at Stephen Stayner is so complex and so interesting, because he literally changed the way a generation of parents parent their child. And he did so by being brave enough to come out publicly with everything that happened to him. And he did so, but then was stifled when he started to speak about what happened to him before that happened to him. So the family. So I'm going to say this again, because I feel like he died as he was about to reveal something else. Okay, so there may have been a sinful trauma within the context of the family of origin that had laundered on down through lifetimes, and he was trying to break that cycle by speaking out. And of course, his life was ended because you can't hit the ground on a motorbike without a helmet. You can't hit the ground anyway. You're going to pass. So he passed, and I'm glad he passed quickly, actually. As he passed out, I get not 1 second of turning around. I get that he hit the ground, stepped out of his body, turned around, and went this way, the opposite way. So it was a relief for him energetically, minus his children and his wife, I'm sure. I did talk about the wife, saying that he had children, they were meant to come through, but that he basically had a lot of remorse for what he put her through and what a kind but tough woman she was. These are the words he used, kind but tough. She did not let him get away. She did not enable him due to his past experiences. She unconditionally loved him. She loved him. But she did not enable him to get away with things because of where he'd come from. She was a tough woman and a loving woman at the same time. So he kind of gave me that impression of her. I don't know who she is, but she probably gone on and get married and did other things. However, Stephen is saying she was tough, didn't let him get away, held him accountable, which is good. It's what his soul needed. Because you can't behave like this just because of this. Which brings me to, in the final moments here, talking about victims of childhood sexual abuse. Each and every one of you need to speak your trauma, even if it was ridiculous. Your uncle sat you on his lap and got, whatever guys get. Or somebody flashed you in the house, peeping Tom. It doesn't matter how trivial you think it is. Holding the shame of the oppressor, the abuser, is part of the problem. Stephen Stayner spoke up about what happened to him. So he spoke up. He let people know. You need to let people know now. I'm talking to people now, not them. People now. This is the energetic trend in order to be cycle breakers, in order to break ancestors' karmic curses. And what I mean by that is not like somebody's actually throwing a curse at you. What I mean by that is the behaviors that we sweep under the rug and refuse to see, like Stephen's mother, Neptune on the moon in Scorpio. She fucking knew, but she wasn't going to dig to find out. So if I don't dig and I don't see, then I don't know. But you do know. Anyway, we need to break those chains that bind us. And in order to do that, you have to be able to stand and speak your trauma. We're not the ones when abused in childhood that carry the shame. We do not carry the shame. The perpetrator carries the shame. You carry the shame if you're the one that abused the child. You need to be atoning, not me. And what do abusers do? They get you to stay in silence. And you carry, now just look at this. Way back in the day, they had a thing called sin eaters, okay? So go back to monks on the side of mountains and shit, wherever. They had a thing called sin eaters. These sin eaters were the ones that would take your karma. So oftentimes, in different cultures, say monk culture, Chinese culture, Christian culture, I don't know who takes what, in Indian Hindu culture, when someone or something dies, why do you think we call them the goat? The goats are stuffed with the sins of the people of the village and murdered to take away the karma. You cannot get rid of your karma like that. The only way you can get rid of your karma is to speak it, acknowledge it, and be brave enough to step into it. To either acknowledge it or take the consequences for your actions. You reap as you shall sow. These cultures actually write shit on paper, stuff it in the animal, send the animal down the river and say, there goes my karma. Like, no, that doesn't work that way. But there's a thing called sin eaters. And I don't believe you can take the karma on of another person. But here's what Kenneth Parnell did. And here's what Stephen's father did. They took their shame, and Carrie Stayner, they took their shame and their overstimulation and their perversion to demonic thinking. It's demonic thinking to abuse a child like that. They took that thinking, okay, and they put it onto Stephen. If Stephen hadn't been kidnapped, this wouldn't happen. If Stephen hadn't done this, Stephen spoke it. He went public and talked about it, just like J.C. Dugard. We know that. That little girl was kidnapped 18 years. So they speak it. But he was still born into a deliberate family connection that kept him bound to his captors. So interesting. It was all over the place. Anyway, once again, my name is Sloan from SloanBella.com.